I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about why we need a philosophy of engineering and how engineering can be a bridge between theory and practice. Raphael's painting, The School of Athens, has at its literal center two men, Plato and Aristotle, both giants in the intellectual development of humanity, pointing in different directions. Plato is pointing upwards towards the heavens, while Aristotle, his student, is gesturing palm open downwards towards the earth. This is because Plato thinks that what is real can only be known by remembering what is in the ethereal realm of forms, where the perfect forms of things reside. On the contrary, Aristotle thinks that by examining nature, we can learn the true essences of things which reside in the things themselves. They represent a fundamental tension that continue to bedevil our intellectual development today. In his 2004 article, Why We Need a Philosophy of Engineering, a work in progress, historian and philosopher of science and technology Stephen L. Goldman deals with this tension between necessity and contingency and between theory and practice. At the heart of the tension is the valorization of the vita contemplativa over the vita activa. In this view, a life of contemplation is considered as more worthy than a life of action, where what is derived by pure reason is deemed more real than what is tangibly before our eyes. His essay speaks to me because even though I am a mechanical engineer and engineers are rather practical people, I love ideas more than the concrete. Ideas are by their abstract nature so pure and perfect, though they are virtual, while the real, though tangible and concrete, are for those reasons solid, full of bothersome features such as being subject to wear and tear, breaking down, failure, in need of repair and maintenance, requiring power to operate, and replete with hazards. Yet ideas can only come into actuality, which is the world we actually live in, through physical implementation, through us being aware and careful to take into considerations the difficulties of being actual. These include having to deal with imperfect rather than idealized materials, energy losses to the environment due to friction, air resistance, and heat, the limitations of our measurement and manufacturing processes, and the potential for errors to add up, multiply, and compound. In addition, there are always remaining risks of what we have failed to consider through a lack of careful thought or imagination, or due to the limitation of our scientific knowledge. Actuality is messy, while ideality is neat. However, actuality is actual, while ideality is virtual. Goldman writes, engineering is contingent, constrained by dictated value judgments and highly particular. Its problem solutions are context-sensitive, pluralistic, subject to uncertainty, subject to change over time, and action-directed. By contrast, mathematics is paradigmatic of what has been most admired in Western high culture, namely reasoning that is abstract, necessary, and value-free, and problem solutions that are universal, certain, unique, and timeless. The geometric method of the deduction of further truths from fundamental self-evident axioms is considered the best way to reason, while induction, no matter how many instances already observed, remains fallible. The sheep which receives its meal daily for umpteenth years inductively assumes that is the order of things until it gets the chopper, while the Euclidean proposition derived deductively that the internal angles of a triangle is 180 degrees seems eternally true. The mathematization of science since René Descartes lends to science its deductive glow. While science has its empirical side, Experimentation seems a continuity of this deductive process. Karl Hamper explains it as a deductive nomological model, where nomos or laws are the natural laws from which can be deduced experimental outcomes. Such verification, as Karl Popper teaches, however, cannot definitively prove any laws. In any case, the laws of nature and the axioms of Euclid are assumed, at best discovered and not proved. Goldman thinks that it is the necessitarian understanding of what knowledge and truth is that radically separates it from action, because action belongs in the realm of the contingent, and what is contingent cannot be knowledge or truth. This, however, is begging the question, assuming that truth and knowledge tells us what is necessary, instead of demonstrating it to be so. It then follows from the necessitarian view that action must then be ultimately willful and determined by desire, which is essentially irrational. Can contingency, however, be a part of rationality? Goldman presents engineering as the prime example of an effective contingency-based model of rational action, though the effectiveness of technologies in harnessing the forces of nature did not manage to overcome the prejudice of necessity-based rationality. Developments in science, mathematics, and logic served to reinforce the prejudice, leading to the unhappy result that engineering continued to find its place as science's handmaiden. This verdict is mostly not resisted, since engineering is commonly viewed as applied science, not just by scientists, but also by engineers. Engineering is central to many technological innovations. Goldman lists the atomic bomb, radar and electronic countermeasure devices, mass production of penicillin and blood plasma, and the pioneer electronic computer ENIAC as examples of good engineering. However, they are celebrated not as engineering achievements, but as scientific triumphs in an influential 1945 report to the President of the US, entitled Science, the Endless Frontier, due to the greater cultural prestige attached to science, despite its author, Vannevar Bush, being an engineer. Indeed, science envy continues today, as seen in higher education, with course names adding the word science to try to benefit by association, such as library science, social science, and even theological science. According to Goldman, this report transformed post-war US science and technology policy, paving the way for public funds to be used to support pure science by arguing that such disinterested research generates knowledge that could create engines of economic growth and anchor future national security when it is made available to engineering and industry. It paints a misleading picture of how science comes first, after which its findings are picked up and applied by engineering, when historically, engineering and technology had led scientific theory at least until the second half of the 19th century. Example Goldman gives of this are the steam engine, the telegraph, and the photocopier, where commercially successful innovations stimulated new science, which enabled new engineering, which led to improved or new applications, which drove further research and newer innovations, a kind of virtuous circle, or in engineering parlance, positive feedback. The same idea led to the creation of the US National Science Foundation, which rejected the very idea of engineering research right into the 1980s. The foundation's thinking was that research is to lead to new knowledge, and since knowledge can only be scientific, the only research deserving of funds by the foundation is scientific research. Philosophy of science has since become an established subdiscipline of philosophy. The philosophy of technology, though nascent, is also rising in importance since technological innovation continues to be a primary agent of social change since the Industrial Revolution, while the philosophy of engineering remains marginal, virtually unknown. It seems as if we have science, and then later we have technologies, and whatever is in between can be just considered a black box of which there is little need to think or philosophize about it. Yet, technological innovation is a complex social process. Goldman explains. The process is one in which technical knowledge is selectively exploited on behalf of institution-specific agendas driven by commercial and/or political values. It is the way that engineers function as enablers of this process of selective exploitation of technical knowledge that needs to be understood in order to appreciate engineering as exemplifying a distinctive form of rationality vis-a-vis science. The role of the engineer and more broadly of engineering can bring insights to our understanding not just of technology but of modern life and the world. The increased pervasiveness of technology brings social, political, and environmental challenges. While the attempt to confront them with a mindset based on universal principles is understandable due to the valorization of necessity, these universal principles are not universally agreed on, leaving us mired in ideological debate. Bridging the gulf between necessity and contingency, theory and practice, the abstract and the concrete, through a philosophy of engineering, may shine new light on what we need to do, according to Goldman. Engineers often do not originate the projects they work on. Engineers work for organizations that initiate their projects based on economic, social, and political demands, which are shaped by value judgments by market participants in the form of consumers, businesses, and governments. The solutions engineers propose to solve the problems of their project likewise take place within commercial or political contexts. By contrast, the problems of science are given by nature, and their solutions are discoveries about nature. While economic, social, and political constraints also exist for the scientific enterprise, they merely set the agenda. They cannot define the kind of solution desired since scientific facts do not bend to our will. While engineers use science and mathematics, the way they do so differs from the scientists and mathematicians, since the nature of problems in engineering, science, and mathematics are different. Scientific theories and mathematical techniques serve as conceptual tools and techniques to be used opportunistically by engineers on engineering's terms, explains Goldman. Their universality requires adaptation to the particularities of the problems confronting the engineers. In addition, science aims at truth. If there are competing contradictory theories describing a phenomenon, and if the true theory is among them, that must mean that only one of them can be correct. Engineering, however, takes a more pragmatic approach to the matter. Truth is what works is a core principle in pragmatist philosophy. We know today that the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics are the best theories of physics, and yet engineers continue to use Newtonian mechanics since it works well enough for most terrestrial phenomena. Moreover, design is pluralistic and open-ended. There are many ways to obtain a desired function. For instance, performance specifications and specification of size, weight, production costs, reliability, materials, time to market, manufacturability, and serviceability can all vary and yet deliver acceptable solutions to a technical problem. Depending on what is considered important to stakeholders, such as end users and producers, different solutions may be optimal. For instance, if a device is only intended to be used for a year, then it is unnecessary and probably wasteful to design its body to last for a decade. As new demands, technologies, and scientific findings emerge, design also evolves. Design is thus a contextual and historical process, as well as being intensely particular, notes Goldman. While scientific theories, on the other hand, if correct, do not evolve. Ideally, they are closed and unique. Engineering hence operates under a bounded rationality, satisfying by providing a solution that may not be the best possible one, but one that is good enough. The solutions can at best optimize to maximize weighted desired performance parameters under the constraints of time, cost, and other non-technical requirements. Engineers have to operate in the face of partial information, since not everything is known about market conditions, the competition, or consumer preferences. We also do not have complete scientific and engineering knowledge, since better theories may arise in future. Besides, science does not tell us what to do with our knowledge of it. What we do with its theories depends on our needs, and is therefore subjectively driven by our value judgments. Different people value the same thing differently. Science is indifferent whether we leave a diamond in the ground, use it for jewelry, or in a drill bit. Some people may, however, like to wear it around their necks or fingers, since they enjoy its aesthetic appearance. Some people may think it is better to not dig it up because it harms the land and the miners. Some people may find its technical properties useful to cut hard materials. The theory of the nucleus helps us develop nuclear power plants, but also nuclear bombs. One leads to the improvement of our lives, while one leads to its destruction, but both are made possible by the same theory. Scientific knowledge and improving the human conditions are disjoint enterprises, observes Goldman. What Goldman has presented is two modes of reasoning, two different conceptions of what it means to give reasons and to be reasonable, and what will constitute knowledge and truth. He terms it the principle of sufficient reason to represent necessitarianism, and the principle of insufficient reason to represent contingency. The principle of sufficient reason harks back to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's idea that everything happens for a reason, a cause or causes, which can sufficiently explain consequent effects. Science is trying to discover such chains of causal reasoning that necessarily produce their effect. In contrast, the principle of insufficient reason is where contingency, probability, subjectivity, action, history, and context plays a comparably pivotal role. Necessity-based philosophy, as epitomized by mathematics and science, has dominated the philosophical tradition in pursuit of universal absolute truths, though contingency-based philosophy may more accurately depict the actual world of particular, shifting, and uncertain action and discourse. In the latter, as exemplified by the sophists, truth is to be discovered through argumentation. It is not absolute but relative, grounded by lived experiences and actual circumstances, and not just figured out through our intellects by pure reason alone. Actual things are not just poor, inferior copies of idealized Platonic forms. They are what we have to make do with, as opposed to what is perfect but unattainable. Life is lived not merely in accordance to abstract reasoning, but by our contingent will, and in the face of action uncertain in its outcome. This is not to say that we hence are condemned to live irrationally. As Goldman tells us, it is simply a different basis of rationality. How I view this antinomy is that while we can and should aspire to discover universal absolute truths, in the meantime we must yet live despite the uncertainty. While we can aspire to create pure materials, we have to continue to work with the impure ones we actually have. In any case, philosophy itself has reacted against necessitarianism. Goldman outlines how the tradition has swung between the two extremes, from Platonic absolutism to Aristotle's more grounded, though not quite practical or empirical approach. Within Platonism itself arose its later skeptical school, which shifted towards contingency and probability. Skepticism was then rejected in the early Middle Ages as Augustine's theological Christianity espoused absolute truth. This in turn was challenged in the late medieval period by the scholastics, as exemplified by the massive debate of realism versus nominalism. The Reformation and Counter-Reformation revived contingency, and the Renaissance marked the beginnings of modern engineering. Then rationalist philosophers like René Descartes, Benedictus de Spinoza, and Leibniz paved the way for the scientific revolution, after which Immanuel Kant and Gottfried Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel further consolidated necessitarianism. This then sowed the seeds for the Romantic Revolt, and later philosophers such as Arthur Schopenhauer, Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Henri Bergson, who emphasized the primacy of will and action, not abstract reason. Across the Atlantic in the 1870s, pragmatism as a philosophy was born. Goldman elaborates. Unlike the Romantics and the philosophical critics of reason, pragmatists generally, and John Dewey especially, were enthusiasts for science, the scientific method, and the application of scientific reasoning to all aspects of life. But for Dewey, the key to understanding science lay in engineering. Dewey argued that science was a form of engineering, that it was only hypothetically abstract, universal, necessary, and certain. In truth, science was as value-laden and interested, hence as contextual as engineering. It seemed to me that universality, necessity, and certainty can only be aspirational, since scientific discoveries have to spring from human experience in the actual world. Theories and ideas do not come from disembodied acts of pure rationality, and even when they come from purely mental cognitive effort and not experimentally, such as Stephen Hawking's physics findings, these ideas are thoughts of people living in an actual and not idealized world. Scientific work often begins in response to actual problems. Geometry was used to calculate size of fields for farming and to construct buildings, and numbers were devised to count actual things. They were not pure, disinterested acts of thought. Theories and ideas are historical because they rely on previous knowledge. Could general relativity be laid out mathematically if not for the non-Euclidean geometry already conceived? Could we have arrived at quantum mechanics if classical mechanics did not come first? We have no way of knowing with certainty the answers to these questions, since they are counterfactual. But the fact remains that new theories often arise in response to difficulties facing prevailing theories. For instance, the Ptolemaic explanation of epicycles stacked upon epicycles to resolve the anomalies of geocentrism, which then led to the Copernican revolution of heliocentrism. In addition, Dewey thinks that science and engineering are not opposed because they both rely on a process of systematic correlation of action with its actual and intended consequences. One of Goldman's aims in presenting these competing approaches to philosophy is to demonstrate that there is ironically no necessity to the necessitarian point of view. It is a product of a cultural contingency which has been challenged repeatedly in our intellectual history, sometimes coming out on top, sometimes below. He has portrayed science as methodologically grounded on necessity-based philosophy, while engineering as grounded on contingency-based philosophy. It is in any case a false dichotomy, since theory and practice, and contemplation and action are both important. Theory informs and in that way elevates practice, while theory without practice is lacking. It is my view that engineering is in fact a synthesis between both approaches. It relies on necessary truths such as the laws of physics and chemistry, with engineers thinking deeply about the particular technical problems they want to resolve, but also more broadly about that class of problems for which they develop methods to solve. leveraging science and mathematics in order to do so. It develops theory to inform its practice. Sometimes what it discovers in practice, it investigates more deeply into in order to form a theory so that it can extend its practice. Goldman writes, engineering practice in the modern world is embedded in a very particular social context, one that has evolved out of mid-20th century industrial capitalism. This process is one in which engineering serves managerial agendas. Engineers apply their expertise to the solution of problems which derive from these commercial or political or military agendas, and their solutions enable the realization of these agendas. Engineering is thus ineluctably a socio-political as much as a technical knowledge practice. According to Goldman, Dewey's understanding of instrumentalism is different from the way the term is used today to value effective function for use above all else. Instead, for Dewey, it is the name of the complex process through which we respond deliberately and effectively to experience, a name for the content of consciousness. A pragmatic inquiry is not one of complete disinterestedness, but is stimulated by a desire to change a particular state of affairs, either to end a present undesirable one or bring about a desired but absent one. While it derives from our subjective desires, wants, or needs, it can still go about its task logically. Goldman adds, what makes inquiry and cognition rational for Dewey is the clarity of the determination and assessment of the end desired, the appropriateness of the means specific to achieve that end, and the attention paid to the evolving experience of implementing the specified means, which may require modifying, even abandoning the end no less than modifying the means. Goldman sees in Dewey's pragmatic philosophy the same rationality of engineering, and believes that this engineering rationality can also inform philosophy, pragmatism, a philosophy of engineering, and also a philosophy of action more generally. He elaborates, as engineering exemplifies a practice that successfully couples values and knowledge to the world, pursuing a philosophy of rational action by studying engineering practice seems a particularly promising vehicle for exploring experience as itself a source of values. He thinks it is high time that values through contingent needs be incorporated into philosophical thought, and that engineering can be a source of insight into the physical, social, and cultural problems associated with technological innovation. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.